Middle East stands on a razor's edge as Washington and Tehran navigate tense talks haunted by fears of Israeli strikes on Iranian negotiators and a massive rebuild fund. The shadow of war looms large. In Lebanon, over 600,000 displaced citizens are returning home, yet a fragile ceasefire masks a tragic reality. With 4,300 dead, rights groups warn that this deal betrays war crime victims. Beirut accuses Hezbollah of blocking agreements on Tehran's orders, even as Israeli forces continue striking southern positions. Adding fuel to the fire, Israel just approved 13 new West Bank settlements. So, from diplomatic tightropes to expanding borders, we unpack the crises reshaping our world. I'm Hela Al-Hamalawi. Let's get in focus. Serious doubts currently shadow the proposed U.S.-Iran-Lebanon deconfliction mechanism. Originally designed to halt Hezbollah-Israel violence, its launch remains highly uncertain as Beirut awaits vital structural details from Washington. Instead, diplomatic energy has boldly pivoted towards the newly signed U.S.-Israel-Lebanon trilateral framework. This distinct pact actively bypasses Tehran, seeking to restore full Lebanese sovereignty while financially backing the national army. The ultimate vision involves a phased Israeli withdrawal alongside disarming Hezbollah. However, enforcing these ambitious steps on the ground stands as a massive hurdle for regional stability. The Trump-backed truce in Beirut, intended to secure a broader U.S.-Iran peace accord, dangerously risks igniting a civil war. Israel demands keeping troops on southern borders until Hezbollah fully disarms on improbable condition. Consequently, Hezbollah fiercely rejects this Washington-brokered pact, directly threatening the fragile national government. Forcing a state army to confront heavily equipped factions could easily fracture the nation. Ultimately, conflicting diplomatic strategies among American officials trap the region. Instead of achieving true stability, this complex crisis pushes the country towards a grim nightmare of sectarian violence and endless occupation. To provide more analysis, joining us from Florida is Dr. Robert Rabil, political science professor at Florida Atlantic University. Welcome to In Focus, Dr. Robert. Now, how do recent leaks about U.S. fears of Israel targeting Iranian negotiators disrupt Trump's push for a permanent peace deal?
I wouldn't say Israel did that. I would say you have a consensus between the government of United States, the government of Lebanon, and the government of Israel to separate the separate the Iranian-American track from the Lebanese-Israeli track, and this is mainly to go ahead and for the state of Lebanon, to impose its authority and its sovereignty over all its territory.
Mm-hmm. So why is Washington actively sidelining the U.S.-Iran-Lebanon deconfliction cell in favor of a framework that bypasses Tehran?
No, it did not sideline it or derail it. You can stop. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Memorandum of Understanding, it will say the war is going to stop on all. But that doesn't mean that a new track, mainly a more specific track between Israel and Lebanon, under the sponsorship of United States, will not go forward, and this is because how you are going to speak with the Israeli, how you are going to secure the withdrawal of the Israeli forces, and most importantly, how you are going to secure stopping the war, which has been disastrous for all Lebanese, and especially the Shia.
So, can Beirut realistically assert its sovereignty when it still lacks the structural details of these proposed security mechanisms?
Well, it's going to take time, and this is why you have in the framework agreement that was signed between Israel and Lebanon, you have pilot zones. Mainly the pilot zone, you will go in the first one to make sure that there are no armed there, no Hezbollah weapon there, and then the army will go there, and then the second pilot zone, and it will go forward. Mainly you have certain phases. Israel and United States and Lebanon knows they cannot, in one instance or in one day to go ahead and disarm Hezbollah as merely, called for by the United Nations Resolution 1701. But what they can do, up in phases. And this is why you have the pilot zones.
Mhm. Does the Trump broker truce in Beirut actually secure peace, or does it dangerously push Lebanon towards a new civil war?
I don't see you are going to have a civil war. Civil war with who? With who? Do you think Hezbollah is going to fight the Druze or the Sunni or the Christian? The majority of who they would like mainly to stop the war and to have some kind of an arrangement with Israel? No, I don't think this is mainly, this is what you have today. We are seeing, Iranian via Hezbollah pressure on the Lebanese government. This is what you are seeing. Already, the Speaker of the House rejected the agreement. You have certain demonstrations that takes place here and there, but I don't speak about really civil war. Civil war, who's going to fight who? And mainly, listen, in all countries, in Egypt and everywhere, tell me, where do you have two armies? You should have one army and one state. And
Definitely.
this is what Lebanon, really, the president said. And please, the president of Lebanon, he made it clear to the Iranians, is what? We are, it's our country. Don't get involved in our country. Let us resolve our own problems.
Mhm, mhm. Sir, is Israel's demand for total Hezbollah disarmament a realistic security goal or a pretext for a permanent occupation, in your own opinion?
I don't think you are going to have a permanent one. I think that it's going to take a little bit time. And this is merely, goes to the army and, of course, backed by the Lebanese government. And this is why it's a big test for the Lebanese government to go ahead. And as I mentioned to you, to go ahead and impose their authority over all territories. Now, it's going to take time. Of course, it's going to take time, and during that time, Israel will remain in its buffer zone, mainly in its security zone, until, you have, and mainly I would see, until you see a process, a process, a mechanism, where the Lebanese government is moving, gradually to disarm Hezbollah. And I know it's an uphill battle, I have no, think about it. I think it's very difficult, but it must be doable. Lebanon has to become a country again. It cannot remain the farms that it is today.
Mhm, mhm. As 600,000 displaced Lebanese return home, how do we explain the continued Israeli military strikes in the south?
Well, as a matter of fact, this is where the government steps in, and this is what the prime minister and the president, they are insisting that, once the pilot zones are, safe, they could go there, and Israel will not, attack them or attack those areas. Israel is attacking mainly Hezbollah's infrastructure, military infrastructure. And they made it clear, as a matter of fact, early on in the first round of negotiation between Israel and Lebanon. They reserved themselves the right to say, listen, if you are going to see a threat from Hezbollah or they are firing at us, we have to fire back. So I think myself, and this is why the pilot zones, it's a good way to start this process. You create them, the army is there, the Lebanese army is there, and of course, Israel will not and should not then, fire at any, because there will be no Hezbollah weapons there or no Hezbollah fighters threatening the security of Israel.
Mhm. How does Israel's sudden approval of 13 new West Bank settlements complicate the broader U.S. push for regional de-escalation, in your own opinion?
As a matter of fact, this is something really the Palestinian and the Arab world, the Arab countries, and at the top of them should be Egypt, UAE, and others. They should, speak with Israel. They should go speak with the United Nations, and they should say, no, this not should be done, because you have enough Arab countries today that have, relationship with Israel, peace treaty with Israel. And I think that the Arab countries and the Palestinians should go ahead and speak with the Israeli government and put pressure on it so as not to go ahead and build a new settlement. This has to go mainly according to United Nations and according to the agreements, the recent of which it took place between the UAE and Israel, mainly to suspend, building of settlements.
If neither Israel nor Hezbollah is willing to withdraw first, what is the ultimate fate of this newly sized buffer zone?
No, as a matter of
fact, I'm sorry.
No, listen, the process has to start, really has to start. Lebanon has been like this for quite some time, from, really from the PLO in south of Lebanon, then to the Syrian, then to the Iranian, then to Hezbollah. The Lebanese government has to start, and now this is, the start of that process. And I think myself, Hezbollah has to go along, and little by little, the Lebanese government should, go ahead and impose its authority and sovereignty, and of course, to take back the decision of war and peace, and not to keep it in the hands of Hezbollah.
Sir, does the apparent policy tension between Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary Marco Rubio signal deep contradictions in Trump's strategy, in your own opinion?
All right, I think you have different opinion, but I don't think you have some kind of a disagreement, like a real disagreement between the two. Really, you have different opinions about how to go about things. But this is mainly has been resolved by the decision of the President of the United States. And the President of the United States is clear in his political orientation. And you have Rubio and Vance behind the United States, behind the President of the United States.
Ultimately, does this combination of diplomatic tightropes and expanding borders make a comprehensive Middle East peace impossible?
Listen, you have problems. There is no problem. There is no question in my mind that you have problems. But these problems have been there for quite some time, really. And what happened after October 7, mainly from October 7 on, it has mainly kind of exacerbated these problems from the new Israeli defense strategy. Now it's no longer its deterrence, its prevention, and to what's happening in Lebanon and to what's happening between Iran and United States and Iran. So I think, yes, and I have no question about it. As I mentioned to you, you have a problem, but those problems, they should be addressed. And most importantly, the parties involved should have the determination and will to go ahead and address it. And I believe at the end of the day, probably it's going to take some time. I believe it will be done. And hopefully it will be done.
Hopefully. That was Dr. Robert Rabil, political science professor at Florida Atlantic University. Thank you so much, Professor, for your special insights. Now we move on to the recent developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The New York Times reports that Ukraine has intensified its campaign inside Russian territory through long-range drone and missile strikes targeting oil refineries, infrastructure in Moscow and Russian-controlled Crimea, increasing pressure on the Kremlin, of course. According to the report, these attacks have contributed to fuel shortages, disruptions in Crimea, and growing public frustration over the economic and social costs of the war. Despite these challenges, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signaled no intentions of changing course Following recent Ukrainian strikes, Russia launched large-scale missile and drone attacks on Kiev, while Putin pledged to continue military operations and strengthen Russia's air defenses. The New York Times also reports that more than 3 years into the Russia-Ukraine war, Moscow is facing growing military, economic, and political pressures, despite continuing offensive operations. According to the report, new Western assessments estimate that combined Russian and Ukrainian military casualties have now exceeded 2 million, underscoring the enormous human cost of the conflict. With no meaningful diplomatic breakthrough on the horizon, both sides appear committed to sustaining military operations. The report adds that these developments come just before the NATO summit, where allied leaders are expected to discuss continued support for Ukraine, deterrence measures, and long-term European security. For more analysis, we're joined from Vienna by Mr. Sebastian Schaffer, Director of the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. Welcome, Mr. Schaffer, to Qnews. Now, Mr. Schaffer, new assessments suggest that combined Russian and Ukrainian military casualties have now exceeded 2 million. What does this milestone tell us about the current stage of the war, and how significant is it from a military and also political perspective?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah. It's for me, it's a staggering number. But for the reality in both countries, unfortunately, and especially for the Russian Federation, we know that historically, this is just a number. And it might be, as you named it, a milestone, and it's a very sad milestone, but human life is expendable, especially in the Russian Federation. And so there it won't have less of an impact. On the Ukrainian side, there is, of course, the situation that the overall number of people that are dying is, on the one hand side, less expendable from the side of the state, because humans are treated as humans. On the other hand, it's also, they have simply smaller numbers in Ukraine. And of course, there's suffering on both sides, tremendous amounts of lives lost. And yeah, these numbers, I'm afraid, will just continue to rise.
Despite these unprecedented losses, neither Moscow nor Kiev appears ready to scale back military operations. So what explains the continued willingness of both sides to absorb such high costs?
On the one hand side, the Russian Federation, I think, is in a position where they could end the war, but are not willing to end the war because they still have officially, to their reading, not fulfilled the goals of that, what they call special military operation. They would want to find the possibility to completely control at least Donbass. And this is something that at the moment is very hard to accept for the Ukrainians, because the momentum on the battlefield seems to be shifting. And of course, giving up territory that the Russian Federation is not controlling yet would not be a very wise move at the moment. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces are defending their homeland. And in such a case, it's to a very high extent understandable that they are also continuing to defend. And as you have also mentioned in the beginning, at the moment, Ukraine seems to have this momentum. They are targeting oil refineries in the Russian Federation. They seem to have a stabilization on the battlefield. They have, for the first time in months and in years even, gained more territory than the Russian Federation. And therefore, both sides have an incentive to continue to fight at the moment.
Recent days have seen large-scale Russian missile and drone strikes on Kiev, while Ukraine has continued long-range drone operations inside Russia. How do these exchanges reflect the evolving character of the conflict?
We can clearly see that the strikes that the Russian Federation has done on the 2nd of July, in the night to the 2nd of July, is targeting civilian infrastructure, as they have been doing basically each and every day this year. And also in 2025, there were only 2 days where they have not targeted civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. This is clearly a retaliation, and it's clearly a sign of the increased frustration on the side of the Kremlin, because what Ukraine is managing to do, it is hitting critical infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure. It is hitting critical infrastructure in the Russian Federation to an extent that now we can see that there is gasoline rationing, that there is a need apparently also to import gasoline from the side of the Russian Federation. And this comes in a country that is amongst the highest, having the highest amount of natural resources in the whole world. And this tells us something about the development in this war.
The NATO summit in Ankara comes at a pivotal moment in the conflict. What are the principal decisions and messages that alliance leaders are expected to focus on?
Well, I would say we need to distinguish, on the one hand, what we will see in the press conferences and the statements that are published. But then there's also something that is very important in the backside, what we are not going to witness and not going to see. One of the major important things is that the alliance is credibly being able to still portray that Article 5, so the common defense clause, is something that NATO can uphold, and where NATO is able to deter a potential attack on any of its members. What is very important, I think, and what we are also going to hear at the summit, is that there is a message of everything is going according to plan. We are continuing, especially from the side of the Secretary General. We will see that we are continuing. We are strengthening the eastern flank. And this is happening. It is true, but there is a wild card, and the wild card is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has questioned the alliance many, many times. And the current situation shows that we need to see, is NATO able to continue being a credible defense alliance? And maybe even more so, is it possible for the partners to build up a credible defense structure, even if the United States is not fully committed to it?
Analysts increasingly describe the war as one of attrition. Which side is currently better positioned to sustain a prolonged conflict in terms of manpower, industrial capacity, and economic resilience, of course?
Well, from the sheer numbers, it is clear that the Russian Federation is positioned better. But Ukraine is adapting, very smart. Ukraine is compensating through technology for the lower amount of people that they have. And their ingenuity has turned around the situation also on the front lines, where what you correctly described is now this war of attrition going on. It's a war that has the most technologically advanced military tech, with drones and also missiles that are used. But at the same time, we have a World War I style trench fights going on. So there is this combination which is very unique in that sense. At the moment, it seems that the momentum is on the Ukrainian side, but the question will be, is Ukraine able to sustain that momentum? And they will only be able to sustain that momentum when they, for instance, they've asked for Patriot systems, not only to be delivered, but also that they will get the possibility to develop them and to produce them in their own country. They've shown that they can have these capabilities. The question is, once again, are we is Europe and is the United States willing and able to provide them with the necessary technology and the necessary weapons.
Well,
And
so
if
far,
this is not the
Ukraine
case,
continues to rely heavily on military assistance from its international partners. How critical is
absolutely.
continued Western support to Kiev's ability to maintain its defense?
It is absolutely necessary. It is absolutely critical. We also see, I mean, the air defense is able to shoot down a majority of the drones and missiles that are sent towards the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, but not all of them. And of course, this is something that is a result of the overwhelming capacity that the Russian Federation has. But they're, by the way, also relying on support coming from other countries, Iran, North Korea, amongst them. And at the same time, it's also clearly a sign that Ukraine and President Zelensky has stated that numerous times, that they also have to, at a certain point, of course, ration what they have in order to protect what is even more important, for instance, factories that are producing their Flamingo missiles or drones, etc.
Western intelligence estimates indicate Russia has suffered the larger share of military casualties. How is the Kremlin managing recruitment and public support as the conflict continues?
It's on the one hand very hard to evaluate because it's not so easy to get a proper picture from what is happening within the Russian Federation. But we can clearly see that not even, according to reports, that not even the high amount of money that is paid for recruitment is recruiting enough people to be replaced on the battlefield. And here there is also increasingly the use of coercion, prisoners that are being sent to the front line. And these people that are there with absolute minimum training, they don't survive a very long time on the battlefield. Ukraine has published numbers where new recruits don't survive even up to an hour on the front line when they are on the battlefield. And this is increasingly getting challenging. But again, it's a huge country with huge capabilities and huge resources. And for the time being, they seem to be able to actually continue to waste this incredible amount of human lives.
Beyond support for Ukraine, NATO members continue to debate defense spending and also long-term deterrence. How could these summits shape the alliance's future posture towards Russia?
I think it will be very important to get at least some sort of sense of unity within the partners. It's going to be also very important to see a clear identification of the threat perception, because I still see that this is something that is very different, not only within NATO, but also, for instance, within the European Union, whereas the Baltics and the Central and Eastern European member countries in both the European Union and NATO have been very vocal about for decades. There are other countries, when we go, for instance, to Southern Europe, where this threat perception is fundamentally different. And they have also a different view towards the most important issues that should be on the agenda. So it will be very important to find some sort of common ground with regards to that. But the most important point is, of course, as I've mentioned already, to see that there is some sort of management of this very erratic behavior that we are seeing continuously coming from the White House.
Despite occasional diplomatic contacts, Mr. Sebastian, there appears to be little momentum towards negotiations. What are the main obstacles preventing meaningful progress towards a political settlement?
So on the one hand side, when you look at what the demands from the side of the Russian Federation are, that they would at least expect to get control over the whole Donbass. Additionally, maybe even two more oblasts that they have written into the Russian constitution as being Russian territory. That this will be at least something that they would want to achieve. On the other hand, the Ukrainian president is unable to make such concessions. He has signaled that he would be willing to do some sort of ceasefire negotiation if there are substantial security guarantees. And I think this is really something that is very challenging, but also understandable. So from the side of the Ukrainians, they would say, we are willing to negotiate maybe seizing territory, but we want credible guarantees that our territorial integrity is not violated again. Because this was something that was guaranteed in the Budapest Memorandum from 1994 when they forego their nuclear weapons. And this has been not upheld by the signing partners, Russian Federation, United States, etc. And on the other hand, if you talk to the Ukrainian population, you can also see that there is a very clear demand for a just peace, where Russia is being held accountable for the things that they've done, the lives that they have taken, and of course also the damage that they've done to the infrastructure of the country. And this is something that I can't see that the Kremlin and the current regime in Moscow is willing to concede to, and therefore we don't see a possibility at the moment to move in these negotiations, even if it from time to time pops up again that there might be a situation where we move towards a more ceasefire development.
Sir, looking ahead, do you expect the coming months to bring further military escalation, or are there any developments that could realistically create space for renewed diplomatic efforts?
I think at the moment, unfortunately, we will rather see an escalation, both on the battlefield. There is a possibility that we will see a new offensive that is being prepared from the side of the Russian Federation. We will also see continued missile and drone attacks from both sides. Again, Ukraine will be trying to target the critical infrastructure, especially when it comes to the possibility for the Russian Federation to sustain that war. On the other hand, we'll see that the tactic from the Russian Federation to target the civilian population in the hope that they will lose the will to continue to defend the country, which I don't believe is something that the Ukrainians will ever come to. There might be a momentum where either side then is overwhelmed through a certain development. I could see that if, for instance, Ukraine will get additional possibilities and long-range strike capabilities in the Russian Federation, that this would change something where we can probably move towards a more a willingness to sit down and negotiate a ceasefire. But again, unfortunately, what I believe is that in the next 6 months, we will see continued fighting, lives lost, and we will unfortunately probably have to have even higher numbers than those 2 million in the future.
That was Mr. Sebastian Schaffer, Director of the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. Thank you so much, sir, for your insights, for sharing this discussion with us here on Q News. From the fragile truces of the Middle East to the brutal attrition in Ukraine, global fault lines are deepening. And as diplomatic tightropes fray, borders shift and casualties mount ahead of the NATO summit, lasting peace remains elusive. That was In Focus. I'm Halal Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching. Stay with us here on Q News for more updates.